Hello everyone, Pulse here with more World of Warcraft Warlords of Draenor discussion, and in this video we're going to talk a good bit about the complete restructuring of the rating tier system in WoW's next expansion. Now it's quite a substantial amount of change, and one that has gotten its fair share of both fan approval and fan outrage. But let's get into the actual changes. We're going to start with a quick description of what's currently implemented in Mists of Pandaria so we all have a point of reference, then we'll jump right into how this transitions into the next expansion. Now, in Mists of Pandaria, we have 4 available raid tiers. We have the LFR, or Looking for Raid, which is just a stagnant 25-man raiding group, which comes together via a matchmaking system, a queue system, and this is just meant to be the more casual, friendly raid environment. It's the easiest variation of the raid content. Now, the next step up in terms of difficulty anyway is Flex Raiding, which was implemented with Mists of Pandaria and allows your raid group to have any number of players between 10 and 25 and automatically scales the content difficulty based on the number of people you have available. Now, next one is Normal Raiding, which, unlike Flex, has no wiggle room in terms of player requirement in terms of the group size. There's 2 sizes, 10 or 25. Slightly more difficult than Flex, but very concrete in terms of the player requirement, as I said. Now, the next one and final one is the Heroic Raiding, which, like normal, has 2 available raid sizes, 10 or 25. This is by far the hardest PvE content in the game, and usually offers quite a substantial jump in terms of difficulty and the number of mechanics and gear compared to normal and Flex Raiding. Now, here is the setup as we go into Warlords of Draenor. Now, I should have an actual slide pulled from the presentation that shows the raid tiers, and more importantly, how they will transition, how they will change with the release of the next expansion. Now, as you guys can clearly see, the success of Flex Raiding has obviously influenced their development for raid content in Warlords of Draenor, with 3 of the 4 available tiers having some of the Flex components integrated. But let's go one by one, shall we? Now, first is Raid Finder. Now, for the most part, this is going to stay the same. It will still require a 25-man group to form in the matchmaking system and get the content started. However, they've implemented this in a way so the Flex technology will kick in if by chance people decide to drop out or you have DCs, and instead of the content coming to a halt while you wait for the system to replenish those slots, which it will try to do, the raid can still continue because the Flex technology will kick in and then scale the content down to the number of players you still have available in the LFR group. Now, next is Flex, which is no longer a thing, and as you can see, it's been integrated throughout the raid tiers we'll have available, and instead they've opted to rename the difficulty currently associated with Flex into Normal. So now the Flex difficulty will be called Normal. Flex is no longer a thing in terms of title. Now, next up is Normal, which is essentially going to be the same difficulty that we've always known it to be, but with the flexibility options of Flex Raiding integrated into it, and it's going to be renamed to Heroic. So in terms of difficulty, the Heroic labeled raid tier is actually going to be the first kind of non-easy variation of the content, just like Normal has always been in World of Warcraft. And then finally, we have the Mythic tier, which is by far the most controversial and unexpected change with the addition of this kind of tier, the change from Heroic to Mythic. Now, essentially, Mythic is going to fill the role of Heroic by providing the really tough challenge. However, as you can see, they've done something kind of unexpected, and they've opted to actually change that to a 20-person group size. There is no 10-man, there is no 25-man. They've kind of gone in the middle and decided we have one group size, that's what we're going to stick to. Now, this is, as I said, been highly controversial amongst the vocal WoW community, which I might add is kind of this really amazingly small minority of the actual WoW player base, but they're so vocal and they do have an influence because, I don't know, people don't know how to have their own opinions or something. But Blizzard, more specifically the community manager of Blizzard, Lore, put out a pretty lengthy blue post answering most of the questions and concerns that have been popping up about the Mythic tier of rating and how it fits into the WoW rating scene, and more importantly, they've given some of their decision-making processes and the philosophy into Mythic and how it came to be this 20-player party size. But let's jump into the actual blue post, shall we? It's quite a read, but I'm going to go through it as quick as possible. So lore begins the blue post like this. We recognize that for some guilds, the transition from 10-player heroic rating to 20-player mythic rating is going to be something of a challenge. This wasn't a decision that we made lightly. Ultimately, we feel that the long-term benefits for everyone, such as better tuned raid encounters, a faster encounter design process, and more variety in raid mechanics, are worth the short-term consequences, even for those players and guilds facing this transition. Now that said, I think there are several key factors worth bringing up that will help make the transition less frightening overall. For example, number 1, this change is coming with an expansion. Historically, an expansion release has always been a volatile time for guild rosters, and a great time for recruitment. When everyone's gear is suddenly equalized again, the pool of potential recruits swells dramatically. It's also a time in which a lot of former players, friends, and guildmates return to the game. Sure, maybe not all of the players mentioned above will be of the caliber you're looking for as a mythic-minded raiding guild, but you only need 10 more players. Number 2. On a similar note, we're continuing to roll out the Connected Realms feature. As more realms become connected, the potential recruitment pool on those realms will grow. 3. While 10-player guilds who want to do Mythic will need to pick up an extra 10 people, current 25-player guilds will need to shed some players. That's yet another thing that will lead into a higher pool of potential recruits. 4. Flexible scaling for Heroic, what is currently known as Normal in Mists of Pandaria. That difficulty will allow many guilds to ease into the 20-player raid size. Granted, if you're planning on zoning into Mythic on the first day it's available, this won't help you much, but for the guild that will spend weeks or maybe even months on Heroic difficulty before eventually clearing it and starting on Mythic, you'll have plenty of time to expand your roster. What's more, those new recruits won't be expected to just warm the bench while they wait. I think it's an easy one to forget about. It's easy to make a mental comparison between Warlords of Draenor, 10-player guild trying to recruit up to a 20 for Mythic, and a Mists of Pandaria 10-player guild trying to recruit up to 25. But that comparison doesn't really work, because the absolute biggest challenge the MOP guild is facing in this example is finding people who are willing to wait around and possibly not even raid as the guild expands its roster. That's not a problem in Warlords. While you're still working through the gearing up process in Heroic, players 1 or 11, 12, and 13 and so on will actually be able to join you in the content, and it's much easier to keep recruits around when they're actually getting to play the game. And then he continues with some more discussion here, seeing a lot of debate about the number 20. So let me take a stab at clearing up a few things. We chose to put Mythic at 20 largely for the function of raid design. One of the biggest issues we're currently facing with 10-player heroic raiding is that of raid composition. It's impossible for every group to have every class, and often that means they're lacking in certain tools, which in turn means that we can't design encounters around those tools, or if we do, it becomes extremely frustrating for the 10-player heroic guild that suddenly needs a paladin for Hand of Protection, for example. We want to be able to use those sorts of mechanics again. Those of you who have been with us for a while might remember things like mage tanks on High King Malgor, or priests using mind control on Instructor Rezuvis. We want to be okay when, say, the paladin can use Hand of Protection to clear a dangerous debuff, because we can reasonably assume that most guilds will have at least one paladin in their raid group. We like it when someone gets to feel awesome and we have a special task on a fight because of a class ability or that otherwise wouldn't get much use. We can't do that when we're designing with a 10-player raid size in mind. We don't think we'd be able to get away with it at 15 either. At 20, it becomes a lot more acceptable for us to say, you should probably bring a mage to spell steal this. And honestly, that's just one example of the sort of encounter mechanics we can start to utilize in larger group size. I'd also like to call into question the statement of, it's easier to drop people than it is to recruit them. Well, technically, yes, that's true. Finding raiders is harder than it is just not inviting the ones you already have, but totally ignores the fact that cutting people from your roster often means losing people that you like. Which feels better, making new friends or telling your current ones that they don't get to play with you anymore? We're already asking a lot for the 25-player heroic groups to cut out 5 people. Now, as I mentioned before, this was not a decision that we came to lightly. It definitely is going to be very scary transition for a lot of people. We knew that when we made the decision. We just feel quite strongly that when the dust settles from this, we'll all be able to provide a better raiding experience for everyone. Now, that blue post was quite a lot to take in. It was quite the read. My breaths are short, my voice is waning, but there's actually some sound reasoning here in the actual post by Lore. I actually have to side with Blizzard on this one, guys. I actually side with Blizzard's reasoning, and that people are just getting their panties in a bunch over some guild restructuring stuff, which, as he kind of mentioned, every single expansion, every major patch even, guilds change, they evolve, they kind of change to what is available in terms of player base, the recruitment demands, the content appeal, if your guild is even going to do the next thing of content, or maybe there's been some fallout, and there's so many more scenarios where guild restructuring is such a common thing, especially with the patch releases and even more so with the expansions. Now, I also need to give a tip of my non-existent hat to the mention about having a more flexible raid environment outside of Mythic. It allows guilds which aren't able to currently tackle content because they don't have enough people. That becomes a non-issue, because now you can continue to recruit people for your forthcoming Mythic guild runs as you work on the normal modes and the heroic modes, because there is now a flex rating system going in. Now, I do want to mention really quick, because I know there's someone out there thinking to themselves, maybe even shouting at the screen, well, you know what, if you're too casual to have your guild recruit properly and have the players you need to do raiding, then you just run LFR. No, I'm sorry. To those people who are still completely ignorant to the idea that LFR does not fill that role, just no. No, I'm not going to rant over LFR. There's way too many people that have already done that. That's not what we're talking about today. But it has its issues. LFR needs to just have its own thing. They need to change it. But it absolutely does not rectify any of the issues that flexible rating actually does and will do in the next expansion. Just needed to throw that out there. But let's get into the actual Mythic rating. Let's talk about that. I am a little curious as to why they did decide to go 20 over 25. We didn't really get an explanation as to why they did that. I'm assuming it comes to a balance thing, because they've been focusing on 10-player heroic for so much during Mists of Pandaria, but they realized the limitations. Obviously, 10 transitions to 20 a lot easier than it does to 25, so that allows some nice balancing going on, and it also provides a large enough roster for them to, again, assume that you have certain classes available. Now, speaking of the balance part of this thing, I'm really happy to see Blizzard taking a look at how gratifying and how successful the raid encounters were multiple expansions ago, where they actually let somebody's very specific spell or very specific mechanic or spec shine in the actual raid encounters, like the Burning Crusade ones, like you mentioned, the Mage Tank on the Ogre boss High King Mulgar, or the Mind Control for Resuvius. That's pretty interesting stuff, and I have to agree with Blizzard that I get what they were trying to do with Wrath and Kata, where it was a lot less, my class is very vibrant and specific, we're all kind of similar. They were obviously going that route, and I think they decided not to do that anymore. They'd rather have it so you can do your own thing. The particular class and the specific abilities might actually provide a real bonus. Now, I realize this is kind of a hot topic when it comes to PvE content in WoW, because it obviously sits there on the fence. Do you want to be required to take such and such class or such and such character spec, or do you want it so that these mechanics are used like thoughtfully? These are used nicely in the actual raid encounters. Take advantage of the spells that they put into the game. I personally think that it's actually really nice to have that rewarding experience when your class or your ability is nearly required to take over an encounter or take over a challenging mechanic. And when you do that, when you have your certain class or your certain ability come into play and you're kind of held on this higher tier of responsibility, when you tackle that challenge and you overcome it, there's a sense of fulfillment and reward that comes from that that's just you can't get when everybody is so similar in terms of what you can do in a raid, when the raid encounters are not built around having specific people. Now obviously you'll have the players that are worried about backlash in this kind of scenario, where you have your character and for whatever reason you have a class ability that is kind of needed, maybe not needed, but would really help, and you're worried about messing up. But there's two things I would say to that kind of person. One, the type of people that are so intolerant of someone learning a new mechanic or learning an encounter in MMOs in general, these are the kind of people that will bitch about stuff anyway. So there is no reason to fret about these grumpy assholes that just feel the need to rant when you mess up. There's no reason for that. Just find other people that are a little bit more tolerant, and if you can't, just ignore these retards. Seriously, they just, for whatever reason, people are toxic like that. And then two, rise to the challenge. Don't be afraid to try something more challenging. Don't be afraid to roll a class that you like because you realize that, like for example, for a paladin, Hand of Protection is really useful a lot of times, especially in some of the older encounters. But don't let the harsh words of other players keep you down. If you want to roll a paladin, and just learn how to use that spell correctly and how to use it to best benefit your raid in the certain encounters you come across. And I have to say, if you tackle that challenge, in the end, the actual effort it takes and the struggle it takes to overcome the game mechanic can really be gratifying. You can embrace the challenge, overtake it, and feel rewarded, feel really just better about yourself, about tackling that challenge and going, look guys, I did it. I fucking took that thing down, and I learned it, and it's awesome. You just get this feeling of fulfillment when you tackle something like that. So embrace the challenge, guys. It's well worth it in the end when you get over the hump. But you know what, guys, I think that's going to do it for me on this one. Let me know down in the comments below what you think of the new raid structure going into Warlords of Draenor and Blizzard's kind of philosophy behind these change. I personally think that we're going to have some growing pains, as we all seem to be expecting. Blizzard is as well. But in the end, once we get past that initial grumblings of people trying to restructure their guild and stuff, it's really going to work out well. I'm really foreseeing a nice system where both the casual PvEers, the super hardcore raiders on the end, on the other end of the spectrum, and then everyone in between, there's going to be something for everyone there. And I really think that's what they're going for, so I'm glad to see this new structure. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and before you go, make sure to like, subscribe, comment down below, and share with your friends. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.